What would you do if you saw a woman of color, around 50 years old, dressed simply in a coarse robe, sitting quietly in the first-class cabin of a flight, only to be asked to leave by a flight attendant, simply because she didn't look like she belonged? Would you follow the glances of everyone else, judging, second-guessing, or looking away as if nothing had happened? Or would you ask yourself, who's really out of place here? This isn't just a story about a seat being taken back. It's about a woman who didn't argue, didn't resist, didn't raise her voice, but whose silence forced an entire system to reconsider itself, not overnight, but through every stare that had to think twice, through every door that once slammed shut, now slowly opening. You're about to witness a real journey, one that unfolded in the heart of America, from a moment of humiliation in the sky to a reckoning that made airports across the country confront what they chose to ignore. A first-class seat denied, a new law born, and a society relearning how to show respect without needing anyone to wear a suit or flash a name badge. The line for Flight 227 stretched from Gate 9 like a slow-moving river of earbuds, rolling suitcases, and half-finished coffee cups. Most passengers were busy with emails, seat selections, or trying to find overhead space. Hardly anyone noticed the woman standing quietly at the very end of the line. But those who happened to glance back paused slightly, furrowed their brows, whispered under their breath, or discreetly lifted their phones to snap a photo. She was elderly, perhaps in her 70s, maybe even 80s, but her posture was unnaturally upright. She wore a faded indigo meditation robe, the kind more often seen at Zen centers than airport gates. The fabric was soft from many washes, tied gently with a simple cloth sash, where a modest golden emblem was embroidered, a circle bisected by a straight line. She didn't wear it as performance attire, but as armor, with the natural dignity of someone whose every thread carried a story. Her hair was pure white, neatly bun at the nape, not styled to impress nor to appear younger, just plainly tidy and intentional. She carried a small cloth bag with a wooden button, and tucked under her arm was an old leather-bound notebook. No designer purses, no luxury luggage, no neck pillow, no premium water bottles. Just presence. Still, what drew attention wasn't merely the robe or her age. It was her stillness. Amid the chaos of delayed flights, staff rushing around, and children crying over dropped iPads, she stood like the eye of the storm. But curiosity soon shifted into judgment. A young couple in matching athleisure whispered and giggled. A man in a navy suit leaned toward the gate agent and pointed at the screen. "Are you sure she's in the priority group?" he asked, not bothering to lower his voice. The agent looked back, nodded, and smiled cryptically. "Confirmed. First class." The man frowned and turned away. When the loudspeaker called Group 1, First Class, she didn't step forward immediately. She waited for the initial surge of passengers to pass, then slowly approached. Her ticket, pristine, was enclosed in a handmade paper sleeve. She offered it with calm hands. The agent scanned it, smiled politely, though with a trace of puzzlement. "Have a pleasant flight." She nodded softly, saying nothing. On the jet bridge, a young flight attendant caught sight of her and stiffened. Tara Simmons, age 29, a graduate of the Accelerated Flight Attendant Training Program, was the kind who took pride in her professional image. Her uniform was always pressed, her hair tightly pinned, her smile textbook perfect, ready for any scenario. She was aiming for a promotion to the training team. But as she saw the robed woman stepping toward first class, Tara's smile wavered. She briskly approached the woman at the aisle. "May I assist you, ma'am?" she asked while subtly eyeing the outfit. The woman silently handed over her ticket. "Seat 1A." Her voice was soft, steady, not loud, but carried unexpected weight. Tara glanced at the ticket, then at her, then at the ticket again. The name read Clara Mayfield. Seat confirmed. But everything else clashed with Tara's idea of a first-class passenger. No blazer, no Louis Vuitton bag, no detox water. She hesitated slightly. Passengers around them began to notice. A few phones were raised. Someone murmured, "She looks like she just walked out of a retreat." Another chuckled. "Is this a prank show?" Tara quickly summoned her trained sweet smile. Yes, of course, ma'am. Right this way, please. Her voice was sweet but slightly strained. Clara walked forward, slow but firm. At seat 1A, she carefully placed her bag in the overhead bin without asking for help. Her movements were unhurried, unfazed, as if she had done this 1,000 times. She sat down, adjusted her robe, and opened the old notebook. She didn't write, just gently brushed her fingers across the spine, as if greeting an old friend. Tara stood still for a few seconds, then leaned slightly closer, her voice lowered with a hint of gentle correction. Ma'am, in first class, we typically encourage attire that's appropriate for the environment, to ensure comfort for all. Clara didn't look up. Who feels discomfort from being respected? Her voice was calm. Tara hesitated, gave a nervous chuckle. I just... Never mind. Thank you. Then she stepped away. The flight began. Passengers settled in. The seatbelt sign turned off. Drinks were served. Tara made a point of checking on the couple in seats 1B and 1C more than usual. The laughter about the weird outfit grew louder, barely disguised. At one point, Tara returned to Clara with the beverage tray. Ms. Mayfield, champagne or green tea? Her tone carried a trace of mockery. Clara accepted the tea with a nod, saying nothing. No protest, no frown, no comeback. Instead, she quietly reached into her bag and took out a small silver disc. She held it for a few seconds, then pressed it gently against the spine of her notebook. A soft click sounded, almost inaudible. A tiny light flashed, then vanished. Over 3,000 miles away, at a data facility in Houston, Texas, the Sentinel Watch system, a classified aviation ethics network, received a high-priority alert. Dignity override, founder authentication. The command was signed with biometric data in a root code created by Clara herself. No one else could activate it. The system immediately dispatched alerts to compliance units across 8 international airports and a federal agency. Outwardly, everything appeared normal, but behind the scenes, an entire network was in motion. Tara returned once more, this time with dessert. We really admire your unique fashion sense, ma'am. Must mean something special. Clara looked up at her, eyes steady. This is not fashion. This is silence, discipline. But you wouldn't understand. Tara pressed her lips together and walked away. The cabin lights dimmed, phones powered down, sleep masks were worn. But Clara kept her eyes open. She didn't sleep, didn't even blink. She stared forward, not out of anger, not because she needed to explain herself, but because she believed in the system she built. Not to punish, but to awaken. And now it had begun. The only sounds in the first-class cabin were the soft clinks of crystal glasses and whispered chuckles laced with barely concealed disdain. Clara Mayfield remained still in seat 1A, her gaze fixed forward, unmoved by the snide laughter behind her. The couple in seats 1B and 1C were now past their third glass of champagne. The man, who had the look of a fast-living tech entrepreneur, glanced at Clara and nudged his wife. She's probably meditating midair, he said quietly, though loud enough for others to hear. His wife laughed, a sharp, clinking sound like a spoon tapping a wine glass. No, you've got it wrong. This is karate on a plane. A passenger in row 2 heard and playfully kicked into the air, then turned back to Tara Simmons, who was approaching, and performed a mock martial arts bow, prompting a few stifled giggles. Tara smiled unfazed. She liked this kind of humor. To her, the worst thing on a flight was when no one talked at all. At least these laughs kept first class from feeling stuffy. After all, in Tara's eyes, the old woman was merely an outlier, an oddity that didn't warrant correction. But what she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, the Sentinel Watch system had begun its automated passenger response analysis, capturing everything from facial expressions to spoken words via the cabin microphones. Every behavior in the first-class cabin of Flight 227 was being logged with a Level 3 violation flag, ready to escalate to Level 4 if mockery persisted. This system didn't operate based on complaints or customer feedback. It was built upon behavioral ethics algorithms, something Clara had spent nearly 3 decades designing, training, and refining. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to start a confrontation. Everything was being recorded and categorized automatically by the very protocol she created. what was known as the Mayfield Loop, a quiet cycle of observation, extraction, encryption, and conversion into international ethical assessments. But to those on the plane, she was just an odd, silent, strange old lady. The man in 1B turned to the attendant with a half-joking, half-mocking tone. Miss Tara, maybe next time you should double-check the dress code. Who knows? Maybe she's a karate master who'll break the seat with a flying kick. Tara smiled again, without replying. She glanced once more at Clara, this time stealing a look at the notebook on her lap. Its leather cover bore no brand, just a faintly carved circle crossed by a single horizontal line. To Tara, it was just a design. To Clara, it was the symbol of precepts in meditative discipline, a code representing equality beyond hierarchical power. Clara didn't write anything. Her hand rested lightly on the notebook, waiting in silence as if counting down the moments for her system's response. A small green light inside her paper boarding pass began to blink, something only biometric readers could detect. In Frankfurt, an amber alert popped up on the Passenger Service Evaluation Department's system. Simultaneously, at Incheon Airport in South Korea, a discreet notice updated. Behavioral flag detected on Atlas North Air Flight 227. At Toronto Pearson Airport, a message flashed for the receiving crew. Activate watch status. Override authenticated by founder. But inside the first-class cabin, Tara was approaching with a tray of almond buttercream desserts and an artificial smile. Would you care for our special dessert today, ma'am? We call it Cloud Zen. Seemed fitting for your style. Clara looked up, straight into the young woman's eyes. You know, sometimes the harder you try to mock something, the more you expose your own shallowness. Tara hesitated but forced a smile. Oh, I was just teasing. Of course, I didn't mean anything by it. Clara said nothing more. She gently set the spoon down, untouched. But Tara noticed the glances from the rows behind were now fixed on them. Some passengers were whispering, gossiping. One even lifted a phone to start a live stream with the caption, "First class has a monk now." A hashtag began trending on TikTok, #, Robe Lady First Class. But no one realized that Sentinel Watch's Ethics Nexus system had already begun storing facial recognition data of every person in the cabin. Its expression analysis AI was now tracking the frequency of smirks, volume of mocking laughter, repetition of discriminatory phrases, and the passive response times of staff members. In Austin, the central office of the Ethics Oversight Network received a high-level alert. First class morality override. Direct review required within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Tara remained unaware, still moving up and down the aisles, chatting with other passengers, leaving behind fake nods and script-like pleasantries. But what she didn't know was that with every step, she was being evaluated, not by the passengers, but by the system Clara had built. A young girl from row 3 came forward, raising her phone to take a selfie, cleverly angling Clara in the background. "Ma'am, can I take a picture with you? Your outfit, it's super cool." Clara looked at the child, then gently nodded. No words, no smile, just a calm gaze. The photo was immediately posted with the caption, "She looks like she can paralyze the pilot with one stare." The image spread rapidly, and in less than 30 minutes, it had over 120,000 views. Everyone thought it was just a quirky moment on a flight. No one realized that this very woman called cool, weird, or bizarre was the reason 9 international airports were preparing to suspend incoming flights from Atlas North Air pending an ethics investigation. Clara showed no emotion. She slipped a small piece of paper from her notebook into the spine. It was the second-level authentication code, the final seal to trigger full system observation mode. At this point, the passenger ethics scoring system had almost enough data to auto-generate a report to the FAA. If behavior escalated further, one more comment from Tara, one more mocking gesture from a passenger, the protocol would elevate to provisional suspension of international gate access. On the surface, the first-class cabin appeared calm as always, but beneath it, every word, every glance, every scoffing chuckle was being logged as evidence. Tara passed by once again, this time without speaking, but her eyes darted toward Clara with a trace of irritation. Perhaps she was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the woman's immovable silence. Perhaps she had sensed there was no way to provoke the reaction she had hoped for. Another passenger called Tara over. "Excuse me, is there something wrong with that woman? She's just sitting there, not talking, not sleeping. Have you checked on her?" Tara shook her head. "Oh, it's nothing. Probably just her personal style." But inside, the discomfort had begun to spread. She hated how the woman deflated the room, how she remained unfazed by everyone around her, as if she already knew everything that was going to happen. In that moment, Clara closed her eyes. She wasn't meditating. She was timing. In her mind, the system's clock had now been running for exactly 47 minutes since activation. The evaluation report would be dispatched once the 60-minute behavioral threshold was met. Every person who laughed, who took a secret photo, who mocked would be coded into a behavioral index. She didn't need to say a word. She didn't need to present evidence. She was the evidence, and the system was her voice. The plane was still cruising at 36,000 feet, but none of them knew that beneath the cool air and soft cabin lights, a storm was forming in a world they couldn't see. And the one who set that storm in motion was still sitting quietly, as calm as glass.
Flight 227 of Atlas North Air continued gliding through the uppermost cloud layers like a silent arrow. No one in the first-class cabin had the slightest idea that the airline's access to 9 of the world's busiest airports was now being measured in minutes. Clara Mayfield remained still. She was waiting for the final signal. And the system was ready. At the Sentinel Watch headquarters in Austin, a stream of data was being encrypted under the White Path Protocol, a special ethical algorithm that could only be activated when the founder of the behavioral evaluation system personally requested an emergency real-time review, bypassing all intermediary entities. The top-secret override command required 3 conditions. The founder must be physically present, there must be substandard ethical reactions from at least 3 individuals within 60 minutes, and a flight attendant must display signs of discrimination or mockery toward a vulnerable passenger. All 3 conditions had been met, and the only person on board who knew that was the very woman everyone in the cabin was still mocking with names like the Karate Lady, the Flying Monk, or that weirdo in 1A. They were still laughing. They had no idea that they'd already been tagged with behavior type C-4, deliberate mockery with peer reinforcement. Tara Simmons, meanwhile, was growing irritated. Not because Clara had done anything, but because her silence had made Tara feel like she was losing control. In a cabin full of wealthy people looking for something to gossip about, someone refusing to become the topic had made everyone restless. Tara was known as a standout attendant, great at reading the room. But she had no idea how to handle someone who didn't play by normal rules. Clara tilted her head and glanced at the time. 59 minutes since boarding. She opened her notebook and pulled out a second slip of paper, this one marked with 2 diagonal lines. It was the second-tier override authentication code. No one had the authority to cancel it except her. No airport, no airline, no CEO could interfere once the evaluation process had crossed the irreversible threshold. She laid the slip gently on the meal tray in front of her. The dim cabin light reflected off the paper with a soft golden glow, like a tiny candle. Tara noticed and walked over, curious. "Oh, is this some kind of origami?" Clara didn't respond. She calmly pushed the paper to the edge of the table, its corner just brushing the tray's rim. At that precise moment, a radio signal was sent to Sentinel Watch headquarters. The system's background lights turned deep red, the mark of final activation phase. A message appeared. Override confirmed. Ethical disengagement initiated. Simultaneously, at John F. Kennedy Airport, the Ethics Response Unit received an alert. Flight 227 to undergo Level 1 emergency review. Access temporarily suspended pending investigation. In Singapore, the monitoring system notified aviation security. Flight attendant conduct below acceptable threshold. Sentinel Watch founder confirmed on board. Prepare for international public response strategy. In the cabin, no one knew any of this.
They were still laughing at the viral video titled "Old Monk Lady in First Class." No words, just vibes, which was exploding on the quick-scroll platform. The hashtag #AirZenFighter had entered the top 20 trending within 30 minutes. Tara was pleased. She thought, at least I brought some entertainment. What she didn't know was that the video had been flagged by the system as content promoting disrespect toward a protected ethics class passenger, violating Section 7.3 of the International Passenger Service Review Act. Clara remained silent. She simply placed her hand on her notebook and this time turned to the first page. Instead of notes, it bore a single sentence. Respect is not granted by uniform, but by conscience. That line was a quote from the first aviation ethics charter she wrote 27 years ago, a document still preserved at the ICAO headquarters. Every person who had laughed, filmed, or stared at her with disdain was now tagged with a temporary ethics rating by the system. No one would be publicly punished, but consequences would begin soon. They would find themselves unable to check in online for upcoming flights. They would receive a short message. Your passenger account is under temporary ethical review. Further violations may result in denial of service. Tara returned to the cabin, this time holding ginger lemonade, her smile slightly forced. Would you like this drink, ma'am? I was told it suits a relaxed mood. Clara still said nothing, but she tilted her head and, for the first time, looked directly into Tara's eyes. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't sarcasm. It was just a gaze like a mirror. Tara froze. She felt as if she were being read. And at that moment, the cabin intercom came on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We will be adjusting our course slightly due to a coordination request from International Air Traffic Control. Tara stiffened. She had never heard of such a reroute on a commercial flight. There was no storm, no technical advisory. Yet now they were changing course. Clara closed her eyes. She knew exactly what was happening. The FAA and Sentinel Watch had just officially activated Protocol 4.8, mandatory diversion to a designated airport to initiate service and crew behavior evaluation procedures. In Austin, Sentinel Watch's Director of Analysis was receiving real-time data. Behavior charts, mockery frequency, insult interaction ratios, and average ethical scores were being reconstructed live. An emergency virtual panel was convening, composed of representatives from ICAO, the FAA, the Human Rights Council on Aviation, and one special expert, Clara Mayfield, currently participating in a live observational scenario. Unbeknownst to others, the system had coded this as the second Mayfield case, because only twice in history had Clara personally exercised override authority. The first occurred 11 years ago, when a disabled girl was denied water service because she didn't meet proactive passenger standards. Following that incident, 4 airlines lost flying rights to over 18 international airports for 2 years. Clara was now initiating the second, and this time nothing could stop the wave. Flight 227 was still slicing through dense cloud cover when the reroute signal was fully confirmed. The crew was ordered to descend in preparation for arrival at the alternate airport, not because of technical failure, not because of weather, but because of something far more intangible. A full-scale ethical review was awaiting them upon landing. No passenger in the cabin had any idea what was happening, but in the cockpit, the air was growing heavier by the second. Captain Gallagher was the first to see the alert flash across the secondary panel. Sentinel Watch Override Protocol, Level Red, temporary access suspended, initiate procedural reroute to assigned gate. He froze for a moment. No version of pilot training had ever prepared him for a scenario like this. In first class, Tara Simmons was starting to feel that something was wrong. The passengers were no longer laughing. Phones began displaying a message. Arrival at JFK temporarily delayed, receiving airport being updated. Some people were annoyed, others anxious, but only one person remained perfectly still, unfazed by the change. Clara Mayfield, the woman everyone had once labeled the old lady in the weird robe. Tara glanced at her again. This time there was no trace of condescension, only unease and uncertainty. Deep down, Tara sensed that something much bigger than herself was unfolding, and maybe it had started with this woman. On the ground, everything was moving much faster. At Sentinel Watch's headquarters, international ethics coordination nodes simultaneously triggered a soft surveillance order against Atlas North Air. Within just 14 minutes, 9 international airports, from LAX and O'Hare to Heathrow, had temporarily suspended landing rights for the airline's flights. In coordination rooms, orange alerts began flashing on monitors. Route denied until investigation is complete. The airline's PR team hadn't even been informed yet. CEO Eloise Grant was attending an aviation summit in Toronto when a panicked assistant handed her an iPad displaying the alert. "We've just been soft-grounded. Sentinel Watch activated." Her face went pale. She knew if Clara Mayfield was truly on one of their flights and had triggered an override, there would be no way to stop what came next. Back on Flight 227, less than 20 minutes remained until landing at the designated backup airport, a training facility outside Newark once used by the FAA for simulated compliance audits. No one in first class had ever been diverted like this. No one knew why they were caught in an unprecedented situation. A white, middle-aged man in an Armani suit whispered to the person next to him, "I'm guessing a bomb or a VIP on board." The other nodded. "Probably that old woman. She seems like a spy, or cult leader or something." Clara said nothing, but her eyes seemed to confirm something internally. She slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a small blue thread bracelet. It wasn't jewelry. It was a biometric ethics authenticator approved by FAA standards. Every founder of Sentinel Watch was issued a personal device, not GPS-enabled, not Bluetooth-connected, but directly linked to the system when tapped against physical identification terminals. Clara touched the bracelet lightly. The light turned amber, indicating that the lead coordinator was now ready to present herself. This meant, once the plane touched down, all flight path cameras, cabin voice logs, and passenger behavior data from the past 90 minutes would be unlocked for international ethical analysts. Tara walked past and caught a glimpse of the light pulsing from Clara's wrist. She paused, said nothing, but Clara for the first time spoke, not facing her, just softly. "Sometimes silence is a test, and when you laughed, you failed it." Tara didn't fully understand, but her chest tightened. The plane began its descent. In the cockpit, the pilots received a special directive: disable all automated announcements, provide no itinerary updates to passengers. This was part of the ethics testing protocol, to observe reactions when transparency is withheld, to see who remained calm, who spread rumors, who incited tension. Clara wasn't concerned with reaction scripts. She was writing in her notebook, noting emotions, glances, the way one man passed a water bottle to another without asking, how a young woman interrupted a flight attendant with, "We paid for this. We have a right to know." Every small act was documented, but she didn't write for revenge. She wrote to reform a system long paralyzed by indifference. The wheels touched the runway. No one clapped. No one spoke. A strange, heavy silence hung in the cabin. They didn't know where they were. There was no familiar airport name, no welcome message from the captain, only a foggy field in the distance and a few unmarked vehicles waiting. Standing next to a black car was a woman in a gray suit, wearing a name badge. FAA, Ethics Division. The door opened. A special staircase was attached directly to the aircraft. No jet bridge, no red carpet, no music. Just a descent, an appearance, and the truth ready to speak. Clara stood up first. This time no one laughed. Tara lowered her gaze. A passenger stammered, "What? What's going on?" No one answered, but deep inside everyone understood. This flight would be unlike any flight before it. Clara stepped down the stairs. The FAA official looked at her like one might look upon a living legend. No words were exchanged, only a respectful nod. Clara entered the enclosed zone, where the formal evaluation would begin. Inside the temporary assessment room, a screen was ready to replay every second of footage from the cabin. Voice recognition software was processing the audio from each passenger, and the ethical indices, abbreviated as EDS, Ethical Disposition Score, were being calculated. Every smirk, every side eye, every minor gesture would be classified by the system. And from there, not only Tara Simmons' fate, but the entire future of Atlas North Air would be determined. When Clara entered the room known as the Ethical Evaluation Chamber, there was no applause, no theme music, and none of the grand introductions she had once experienced at global events where she was invited to speak. Here, everything was kept minimal. 4 chairs, a round table, a transparent screen floating in midair, and behind it, a frosted window looking out into a small garden. The garden had no flamboyant flowers, only a modest patch growing lavender, mint, and, in one corner, a statue of a hand offering a letter. That was the origin of the name, the Garden of Letters. The garden wasn't just decorative. Whenever a high-level ethics review took place, video excerpts of individual behavior were shown in this room. If the subject displayed remorse, sincerity, or a significant emotional shift, they would be invited outside to sit in the garden and write an ethical response letter, which by rule would not be submitted to the oversight board, but instead sent directly to the person they had harmed. Clara didn't need to sit in the evaluation chair. She was the initiator of the protocol, not the subject of investigation. But she chose to sit on the same side as Tara Simmons, the young flight attendant curled up on the white chair, her eyes still red. The other 3 people in the room included an FAA ethics officer facilitating the session, a Sentinel watch systems engineer operating the behavioral AI interface, and a representative from Atlas North Air, who looked visibly uncomfortable seeing Clara enter the room like a living symbol. Tara said nothing. Not because there was nothing to say, but because she didn't know where to begin. Clara spoke first, not coldly, not arrogantly, but gently, like a grandmother speaking to a lost granddaughter. "Do you remember what you said to me?" Tara swallowed hard and nodded, but she couldn't repeat it. She knew exactly what she had called Clara, which joke she had joined in, and whose pushback she had silenced. The screen lit up. Footage from the cabin cameras began to play. No narration, no commentary, just raw visuals and emotional response metrics from passengers. A series of small indicators appeared in the top right corner whenever someone laughed, glanced, frowned, or showed signs of judgment. The room thickened with tension. The airline rep, Michael Reeds, tried to interject. "With all due respect, I don't think playing these clips is necessary. She's young. She's still learning." Clara turned toward him and said nothing, but her gaze alone silenced him. It wasn't anger. It was a calm conviction, the kind of quiet strength that people like him didn't possess and didn't know how to confront. An audio clip played, Tara's voice saying to a passenger beside her, "We've got a cosplayer in first class." Everyone in the room heard it clearly. Tara closed her eyes. A tear silently fell. And when she opened them again, she was no longer the sharp, polished attendant from earlier. She had reverted to the person she had never dared to show. A 27-year-old woman who never knew her father, raised by a janitor mother working night shifts, rejected from the pilot training program for being culturally unfit, and who had spent years trying to prove her worth by laughing at those with less power. Clara didn't press the point. She didn't scold. She simply asked, "Why did you laugh?" Tara choked. She didn't know why. All she knew was that society had taught her to laugh that way, to belong, to not seem weak, to avoid becoming the target. And now she was the target. The FAA officer nodded. The Sentinel watch engineer entered an approval code. The screen dimmed. A small printer pushed out a sheet of paper. It wasn't a disciplinary report. It was an emotional reflection form, a special issue reserved for those deemed eligible for ethical rehabilitation. One of the few protocols without penalties if the subject chose to write a letter instead of defending themselves. Tara was invited outside, walking alone into the garden. Clara didn't follow, but before she left, Clara placed a small note in her hand. Nothing was written on it except one handwritten sentence. "Restoration doesn't begin with apology. It begins with understanding why you've been silent for so long." Tara sat down on the wooden bench. Around her was the scent of lavender and mint. In her hand was a pen and a blank sheet of paper. She stared into the air. No one rushed her. No one waited. And no one laughed. She began to write, not knowing who it was for. Maybe her mother. Maybe the version of herself from yesterday. Maybe Clara. But each word, each line, seemed to echo back toward her. By the third sentence, her tears fell again. Not out of fear of losing her job, but because for the first time in her life, she was truly seeing herself. At 7 a.m. at the headquarters of Atlas North Air, the skies over Salt Lake City had yet to brighten. But on the 17th floor, home to the company's internal strategy coordination unit. The office was already heating up, with a flurry of emails flooding in all at once. The unusual part wasn't the volume, but the subject lines. "I saw her." "About the woman in the robe." "We were wrong." "How can I apologize?" All sent by mid-level staff, cabin supervisors, airline assistants, and even a few passengers who had flown on the same flight as Clara. Clara didn't write a report. She didn't issue a directive. She left behind only one thing, a message powerful enough to move a system: deliberate silence. No posts, no comments, no press rebuttals. And yet the message spread faster than any PR campaign. Those who had witnessed the incident in first class now felt uneasy, not because they were threatened, but because, for the first time, they were asking themselves, if we treated someone powerful like that, what have we done to those with no power? At the East Region office, a cabin training staff member quietly reopened the entire complaints archive from the past 3 years. There she found a report filed by a young black woman who had been asked to move down to economy despite holding a valid first-class ticket. The official reason listed: causing discomfort to other passengers. The woman, according to the notes, left the plane in tears and never returned. The case had never been addressed due to lack of evidence. The staff member who wrote the incident log at the time was Tara Simmons. An internal report was printed, and an investigator from the Special Conduct Oversight Unit, a woman named Louisa Tran, was assigned. Louisa, of Asian descent, had once been a lead flight attendant before transitioning into ethical compliance. One of the quietest people in the department, but with the highest evaluation success rate. When given the case, she asked no questions. She simply opened the file, read in silence, and stood up. No calls, no emails. She walked directly into the office of the Vice President of Administration. There, Louisa placed the file on the desk. She didn't say much, just pointed at the notes and asked, "If this behavior happens once, we can call it a mistake. But if it happens repeatedly and the system allows it, whose mistake is it then?" No one answered, not because they didn't know, but because no one had ever dared to ask that question before. Meanwhile, in a private conference room on the 31st floor, Clara appeared. No announcement, no assistant. She simply requested a screen and one list: all passengers who had been reassigned seats, denied services, or treated disrespectfully over the past 18 months. She didn't ask for the names of the flight attendants, but instead requested the stated reasons in the reports. Of the 312 cases, 61 listed not aligned with brand image. Clara said only one sentence: "When brand image becomes the excuse to demean human beings, we've already lost what's most valuable." At that same moment, Tara Simmons, who had just undergone the ethical letter writing process, was formally suspended from duty for 90 days. But instead of protesting, she sent a short message to HR. "I accept this decision, but please allow me to enroll in any training available on emotional reflex and unconscious bias. I need to start over." It was the first time in the airline's history that an employee had voluntarily requested rehabilitation instead of avoiding discipline. The ripple effect began to spread. A group of senior flight attendants independently organized an internal roundtable, inviting staff who had experienced discrimination to share their stories. A cabin team leader named Marcus, who had once ignored a verbal dispute between a flight attendant and a black passenger, broke down in tears as he recalled, "I didn't intervene. I thought I was maintaining peace, but in truth, I was defending silence." That statement was shared hundreds of times internally, becoming a new symbol. Silence is not peace. It's protection of harm. At the executive level, the Vice President of Human Resources began feeling pressure from the Communications Advisory Board. How to keep this situation from going public. But Clara declined all meetings related to crisis management. She didn't view it as a crisis. She viewed it as an opportunity to reflect. At a small seminar, when asked if she feared the media fallout, Clara simply replied, "If an organization is afraid of people seeing how it treats the powerless, then perhaps the real fear should be the treatment itself, not its exposure." That quote circulated widely on internal networks and was eventually leaked externally. Within 6 hours, dozens of posts began appearing on Reddit, Twitter, and aviation worker forums. One post titled, "She Didn't Have to Say Anything. We Realized It Ourselves," gained over 300,000 shares within 24 hours. And then the unexpected happened. 9 of the largest airports in Atlas North Air's internal alliance network, from Seattle and Denver to Miami, suspended new cabin crew recruitment procedures to reassess brand alignment criteria in candidate evaluation. One airport director, Hannah Keegan, stated, "If a brand image requires us to reject people who don't dress correctly or speak smoothly, then maybe it's time to change the brand." There was no directive from Clara, but the change spread like a quiet wildfire. No press releases, no declarations, just individuals, one department at a time, beginning to ask, what is right when we strip away every taught assumption?
Every profound transformation begins with a silence that lingers beyond what people are prepared to tolerate. And at the central headquarters of Atlas North Air, that silence had reached its breaking point. Not because of media pressure, not because of shareholder demands, but because every department had started asking the same question. Why hasn't she said anything? Clara Wexler, the woman in the robe who had been dismissed in first class, had yet to appear in the press, issue a statement, or post anything on social media. And yet, it was precisely her silence that had stirred the system more than any reaction campaign ever could. On Wednesday morning, a confidential meeting was called on the 41st floor, the level reserved for members of the Internal Oversight Council, consisting of 9 individuals known as the gatekeepers, those with authority to approve or block major systemic changes. Their names never appeared in the media, but every key decision passed through them. Once everyone had taken their seats, the door opened. Clara entered. No assistant, no PowerPoint, no documents in hand. Only a folded yellow envelope. She offered no greeting, no pleasantries. Her eyes swept across the round table as if memorizing each expression. Then she unfolded the letter and read, not a prepared statement, but a report dated 3 years ago. Her voice was steady, neither rising nor falling. June 14th. Flight 1029 from Phoenix to D.C. A female passenger was asked to leave her seat for not being dressed appropriately for first class. In her complaint, she wrote, "I wore a cardigan and black trousers, but because I had a headscarf and brown skin, the flight attendant said I made other passengers uncomfortable." Clara paused, her gaze resting on the man seated to her right, George Manley, who had abstained during the vote on changing the customer identification protocol. She didn't say his name, but everyone in the room knew she was invoking cases the system had ignored. She continued. November 22nd. An elderly passenger was stopped at the boarding gate for lacking ID after recently losing her wallet. She offered to verify via confirmation email, but the staff refused. It was later discovered that she was a historian honored by the very city where this airline is headquartered.
Clara paused again. No one spoke. She folded the letter and placed it gently on the table. Then she said, "These are the letters I've kept over the years. The system never considered them important, but I read every word, because I was once one of them. Not when I wore a blazer, but when I wore a scarf, a robe, when I didn't look like the brand expected." A woman among the gatekeepers, Ruth Ames, of Jewish descent and rarely vocal, spoke for the first time. "I'm sorry, but why didn't you bring this up sooner?" Clara replied, "Because until now, no one asked." That answer filled the room with silence. No rebuttals. No one walked out. A few lowered their heads. A few sighed. Then Clara presented another thin folder. Not more complaints, but a proposal to replace the current gatekeeper structure. She didn't conceal it. She didn't try to persuade. She simply said, "The 9 people you see now will no longer hold unilateral control. I propose a dialogue mechanism where 3 of the 9 seats are rotated among those who have been harmed by the system or representatives from the passenger community." George Manley objected first. "That's unrealistic. They won't understand how complex our internal operations are." Clara looked directly at him. "They don't need to understand every technical process. They need to understand pain, because this system runs on their satisfaction, not our comfort." The debate lasted 3 hours. In the end, there were only 2 votes against, 6 in favor, 1 abstention. The following morning, an email was sent across the airline's internal system. We are changing from the inside. And this time, the first voice we listen to is not the CEO. It's you. The email wasn't signed by Clara. It was signed by all 9 new gatekeeper members, with 3 new names introduced. A single mother once removed from a flight because her baby cried, a veteran denied boarding for wearing a non-regulation uniform, and an airport janitor, once labeled an eyesore for standing near the VIP lounge. The change had begun. News of Clara Wexler's quiet yet bold reform at Atlas North Air spread faster than anyone anticipated. Not because of sensational headlines, not due to viral social media shares, but because of something more powerful than any media storm, the voices of those who had once been silenced. Passengers once stopped for unjust reasons now began writing letters of thanks. A former flight attendant, who had been dismissed for being too sensitive to discrimination, appeared on a podcast to recount the moment Clara stepped onto the plane in her robe. And then, an email appeared in Clara's personal inbox from the chair of the U.S. Senate Committee on Ethics and Equity Hearings. It wasn't a formal invitation. It didn't include a fixed meeting time. The message contained only 2 lines. We need you in Washington. Not to testify, but to help us understand what makes a system choose not to listen. Clara arrived in D.C. on a gray morning. She didn't bring an advisory team, nor did she fly private. She chose a commercial flight, and this time, when she boarded first class, no one stopped her. No one asked to recheck her ticket. A black flight attendant in her 50s gave her a small nod. I know who you are, and I just want to say, thank you. Just one sentence, but enough to make the entire flight feel like a journey with no cameras needed. At Capitol Hill, Clara wasn't welcomed with a red carpet, but with a courteous silence that bordered on discomfort. The hearing room wasn't crowded. Only 7 people were present, 3 Republican senators, 3 Democrats, and 1 independent. But they all had one thing in common. They didn't look at Clara as a CEO. They looked at her as a living witness to a system that had lost its capacity for self-correction. The session was chaired by Senator Henry Lowell, 72, from Wisconsin. He didn't begin like a politician. He began with a personal story. In 1987, I took my mother on her first flight. She wore her traditional Muslim robe because she refused to change who she was, just to sit in a chair. When she was denied boarding, she just smiled and said, maybe this country isn't ready to see someone like me in the front row. Today I've invited you here because I think this country owes you, and women like my mother, an explanation. Clara didn't read a report. She brought no charts. She simply spoke, in a steady voice, about her 3-year journey, reading hundreds of ignored complaint letters, about her own silence when advised to let PR handle it, and about why she chose to speak out, even though no one asked her to. Because I realized, if I, someone who had once been silenced, don't stand up, then who will? A young senator named Collier, known for aggressive questioning, asked, but do you believe you overstepped as a CEO by intervening so deeply in operational protocol? Clara didn't hesitate. If a CEO cannot intervene when the very system they helped build is hurting people, then what is that title even for? No one responded. She told them about the meeting with the gatekeepers, about the proposal to rotate 3 seats for community representatives, about the initial pushback, the hesitation, and about the letter that was sent out, not signed by her name, but by the collective. She said, change doesn't begin with firing someone. It begins when decision-makers stop believing they are untouchable. An hour later, the hearing concluded, but no one left the room right away. One of the Republican senators, Eliza Hatch from Missouri, quietly said on her way out, I didn't expect to be moved like this today, but maybe I need to go home and speak with that flight attendant I once yelled at for serving drinks out of order. 3 days later, a draft resolution titled the Passenger Dignity Resolution was introduced. It wasn't long. Just 3 provisions: require all airlines to help establish a passenger feedback council with rotating seats for community representatives. Instruct the Department of Transportation to build a real-time passenger sentiment monitoring system, not to surveil, but to listen for unreported harm. Recommend the creation of a program called Letters from the Back Row, where passengers can send letters directly to someone they wish to receive an apology from an explanation, or simply recognition. The advisor listed for the resolution? Clara Wexler. But on the official document, she requested her name be left blank. Instead, the sponsor listed was Tara Simmons. 1 week after the Senate hearing, Clara Wexler entered a glass-walled room on the 29th floor of Atlas North Air headquarters. No press, no cameras. Just 7 people sitting around a round table, each representing a part of the system that had once made them feel invisible. Beside them were 3 former members of the executive board, individuals who, after years of making decisions behind closed doors, had now been invited to listen. This wasn't an executive meeting. It was the first gathering of a group called the Framework Committee, tasked with rebuilding the company's internal structure based on one guiding principle: no one gets left behind. Clara didn't begin with a greeting, but with a question. If our system disappeared today, who would be remembered first, and who would be remembered last? No one answered right away. No one knew where to begin. But that hesitation was proof of something Clara had always believed. The system lacked neither metrics nor KPIs. It simply lacked real people placed at the center. The meeting began with dismantling. Each person was invited to share, not an improvement idea, but the moment they felt most hurt by the company. A flight attendant recalled being urgently reassigned mid-shift because a customer didn't like her voice. A security supervisor admitted to once being pressured into downgrading an elderly passenger to economy because of brand image policy. A member of the marketing content team, once an award-winning copywriter, remembered when her original slogan, "Welcome whoever you are," was edited into, "We welcome the world that flies with class." Clara said nothing. She simply took notes. And after 2 hours, she shared a simple draft. No flashy header, no bullet points, just 3 columns, each labeled clearly: dignity, not appearance; voice, not title; correction, not fear. According to Clara, these 3 principles would become the foundation for all new system procedures, from flight attendant training to incident response to employee evaluation and promotion. But what stunned the group wasn't the content, it was how she proposed it be implemented. Not top-down, but outside-in. Specifically, Clara proposed that all new company initiatives, whether tech upgrades, process changes, or strategic decisions, must go through an empathy trial simulation involving people previously harmed by the system. Not just consulted, but empowered to conduct emotional review. A member of the strategy team, who had previously worked at several other airlines, objected, "Won't that turn the company into a hostage of feelings?" Clara looked straight at him. "If we don't want feelings to drive us, then maybe we shouldn't be causing pain in the first place." The room fell silent. Then one person nodded, then 2, then all of them. The Framework Committee was formally established, not as a decision-making authority like the Executive Council, but with equal standing. Their role, not to make decisions, but to oversee all decisions through the lens of ethics and fairness. A week later, the first extended committee meeting took place, not within 4 walls, but streamed live to every Atlas North Air employee worldwide. Clara didn't appear as CEO. She stood in the background. Instead, the session was hosted by a ground staff member named Theo Martin, once suspended for talking too much to passengers. He began with his own story, then introduced a new protocol called Compassion Override, a process that allows any employee, from new hires to mid-level managers, to temporarily override a system directive if they believe the action causes unnecessary harm. For example, if the system flags a passenger for denied boarding due to invalid ID, but that passenger just experienced a crisis, lost their wallet in a fire, is a victim of abuse, the employee can invoke Compassion Override, providing a specific justification for manual resolution. No one is punished for using the override, but if misused, the employee must explain themselves before the Framework Committee, not for discipline, but to be heard. The first test ran at Orlando Airport. An 87-year-old woman from Colombia, who spoke no English, had gotten lost on the way to her gate. The system flagged her as late and requested her ticket be rebooked for the next day. But a Dominican-born staff member, nicknamed Little Clara, used the override and submitted, She was disoriented due to lack of appropriate language support. I take full responsibility. Not only was the woman allowed to board, but upon arrival, the airline sent her a handwritten apology signed by the CEO. In truth, the letter's content had been suggested by little Clara. 4 days later, Orlando's passengers' satisfaction score rose by 18%. A small plaque was placed at the exit gate. We override systems for humans. From headquarters, Clara received an email from an unexpected sender, Thomas Griggs, the former CEO who had once refused to fund the improvement system due to media risk. In the email, he didn't apologize. He simply wrote, "I used to think fairness meant the most capable would win. Now I see, sometimes the first skill you need is the ability to stop and listen." Rain fell gently over San Francisco. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind no one would expect to mark the heart of an airline industry reform. Inside a small dojo tucked away in the Bernal Heights neighborhood. On the weathered wooden door, a line of black ink read, "Respect begins where judgment ends." Inside, the scent of aged wood and tatami mats lingered in the air. Young students lined up neatly, bowing to the person in front of them, not the formal instructor, but a silver-haired woman in a faded karate-gi, her left hand still marked by a fading bruise. Clara Wexler stood quietly at the entrance. No security detail, no cameras, no seats marked for senior leadership. This wasn't a place for ranks. This was the place of Elira Santos, the woman who had once been slapped on a plane simply for wearing inappropriate attire in first class. The woman the media had only referred to months ago as the victim. But today, before these students, she was sensei. None of the children recognized the CEO standing silently by the door. They only knew today's lesson was special because they were learning a new concept, holding space for someone else. Not about combat technique, but about how one steps back to make room for someone more vulnerable to step forward. Elira offered no long lecture. She simply called one student into the center of the dojo and asked the others to form a circle. Then she posed a question. Who here is willing to step back, even when you're standing in the center? Silence. Then one boy raised his hand. Elira nodded. That's the beginning of a true dojo. Not strength, but how we make room for each other. Clara observed it all. In her hands was a file, not a plan to expand the airline, but a proposal to shift part of the marketing budget into the position fund, a community initiative designed by Elira herself. Clara had not sent an invitation. She had not organized a press conference. She came to listen. After practice, Clara approached. Elira saw her, not surprised. They stood facing each other, needing no introduction. Clara extended her hand, but Elira didn't shake it. She bowed, fully and with respect, just as she taught her students. You didn't have to come, Elira said. I couldn't stay away, Clara replied. They stepped outside. The rain continued lightly. On the porch, Clara opened the folder and said, I can't undo what happened, but I can step back and hold the right position for the one who deserves to step forward. I want the airline's training program to be co-designed from this dojo, and I want the first name attached to it to be yours, not mine. Elira didn't respond right away. She looked out at the narrow street ahead, where a few students were playing in the rain. She spoke slowly. I don't need a title. I just need respect to be practiced, not declared. Clara nodded. The following week, a new program called The Dojo Within was announced. Not through a major ad campaign, but through a 90-second video showing a student bowing to the person behind them before stepping into the lead position. The only text below the video read, What if we trained for empathy, not just service? Atlas North Air became the first airline whose employee training began with a moment of silence. Not to take attendance, but for each person to recall a time they were treated unfairly and imagine if someone had stood up for them. That moment, called the first position, became the mandatory opening lesson. Every new hire wasn't taught how to load luggage or smile on cue first. They were asked to listen to 3 stories from individuals who had once been victims, not to pity them, but to understand. Service doesn't begin with a smile. It begins with empathy that's practiced. 2 months later, a major newspaper published an op-ed titled, The Airline That Trains Like a Dojo. But Clara declined all interviews. She simply sent back a quote in an email. "I didn't rebuild the company. I just opened a door and stepped aside. The ones who had been pushed out, they're the ones who knew where the structure needed to begin." Elira had never flown again since the assault. But one autumn morning, when she received an invitation from a prestigious university to teach a seminar on ethics in public service, she said yes. She arrived at the airport, still in her old karate-gi, notebook in hand. As she passed through security, no one asked what she was doing there. No one asked her to show her ticket, because this time, the person greeting her was an employee named Clara, not the CEO, but a graduate of the first dojo program, now a rookie. Clara bowed to Elira, once again. But this time, Elira took the young woman's hand and whispered, "Hold that space, because tomorrow someone else might need it more than you."
When the first signs of the Dojo Within program were removed from Atlas North Air's training facility in San Francisco to make way for a new symbol, a graphite-colored circle with 3 footprints inside, no one anticipated that this icon would appear in over 60 countries within a year. But it did. Not because of media coverage, not because of a well-planned PR campaign, but because of a 2-minute video showing a female flight attendant bowing to an elderly passenger before saying, "I'm not just here to serve. I'm here to protect the space of respect that belongs to you." The clip was uploaded unofficially by a Japanese trainee after attending the first training session in Osaka. And within 48 hours from Nairobi to Munich, dozens of airlines emailed Atlas North Air headquarters, requesting permission to implement the program. Clara didn't welcome them with exclusive contracts. She declined all offers for paid licensing. In a video call with 32 airline executives, she stated plainly, "If the only thing keeping respect alive is a training system, then I've failed. But if you believe that change begins with how we confront our own biases, then take this model. Don't ask for permission. Just promise you won't use it to polish your brand, but to restore dignity." Within just 3 months, more than 80 airlines, hotel chains, and public service training institutions had begun applying their own versions of the dojo ethic. But nowhere embraced it as deeply as Johannesburg, where a former flight attendant, once fired for standing up to racial discrimination, had now become the executive director of the training program in South Africa. His name was Thabo, and at the inaugural dojo opening in Cape Town, he gave no speech, accepted no awards. He simply played a video clip from Gate 9, the moment Elira was attacked, and the entire cabin sat in silence. Then, standing in the center of the hall, he bowed solemnly and said, "All my life, I was taught how to toughen myself, but no one ever taught me how to ask someone to stop hurting me without raising my voice. Thank you, Dojo, because here, I don't have to shout to be heard."
The program expanded into Asia not only through airlines but through the public sector in South Korea, where a recent survey revealed that 78% of workers had experienced insults related to appearance or social class, yet never reported them. A nonprofit in Seoul, the Listening Circle, integrated the first position model into every training session for civil servants. One participant wrote in their final evaluation notebook, "I used to think service was an action. Now I understand that service is presence, without judgment." In Canada, the program was adopted by the Ministry of Transport as a prerequisite for transportation companies seeking post-pandemic relief grants. But instead of turning it into a test, they held silent circle sessions, where every new employee was only allowed to speak after listening to at least 3 others share a time they'd been disrespected at work. A journalist covering the program was moved to tears when a baggage handler, once shoved and called a useless mute, shared that it was the first time a coworker ever apologized for not standing up for him. The article read, "We've grown so used to the words diversity and inclusion that we've forgotten how to simply stand beside someone when they need us." Dojo doesn't teach you slogans. It teaches you how to hold space for others and when to hold your silence. Clara declined all television interviews. She didn't speak at the global conference even when invited by the WEF. But when she received a handwritten letter from an employee in Sweden, someone once fired for being not attractive enough for guest service, she wrote back with a 2-page handwritten response that included, "You weren't undervalued because of your looks. You were undervalued because we haven't yet forced institutions to redefine what value means. Now is the time to do that." Later that year, Illyra was invited to speak at the Service Leadership Reimagined conference in Geneva. She declined. Instead, she submitted a video filmed at her small dojo, where she taught young students to bow 3 times before stepping onto the mat. Once for themselves, once for the person beside them, and once for the person who wasn't there, the one who had never been given the chance to step into the dojo. The final words of the video read, "If you see someone without a place, create a circle." 3 months after the circle symbol appeared in over 40 countries, a gray-blue chair began to quietly show up in airport lounges. No signage, no title, no explanation. But anyone who had ever heard of the silence at Gate 9 knew exactly what it was. Clara had never requested it. There was no memo, no directive. But one day at Heathrow Airport, a flight attendant quietly placed a single chair beside the boarding gate, then bowed before stepping onto the aircraft. The next day, an airport in Singapore did the same, then Sydney, then Frankfurt. And then, a small airline in Kenya added a single line of text to the plaque behind the chair. "This is for the one who was once asked to leave." Clara received the first photo of the chair from an unfamiliar passenger, along with a message. "I didn't sit, I just stood beside it in silence, and I understood." The day the chair first appeared at San Francisco Airport, the very airport where Illyra had once been pushed out of first class, was also the day Clara returned to the Gate 9 lounge for the first time since that incident. No one quite remembered where everything had originally happened. The chairs had changed, the lighting was new, the pathway had been widened. But when she arrived, a small group was gathered around the new chair. They weren't speaking. They weren't taking photos. They simply bowed and placed handwritten letters on the seat. Among them, one envelope bore Illyra's name, written in a child's uneven scrawl, and inside was a short essay from a 6th-grade girl. "I once saw my mom cry after being forced to leave her seat on a plane, but now I see her standing in front of our class teaching us how to say the sentence, 'I have worth.' Mom says you don't have to shout, you just have to believe you belong." I wrote this letter to thank my mom and thank the person who taught her that sentence. Clara didn't take the letter. She left everything as it was, gently placing a neatly folded handkerchief beside the chair. The first gift Illyra had ever given her when she was still a trainee in the dojo. Then Clara quietly walked away. A week later, Clara appeared at the final Senate hearing, where the Silent Dignity Act was passed with an unprecedented number of votes. The law required all public service and commercial entities with more than 500 employees to implement at least one silent restoration space, a place where individuals who had experienced discrimination could respond in their own way without being forced into the traditional complaint system. Not to seek apology, but to be acknowledged. At that hearing, no one asked Clara if she wanted to speak. But when a senator stood to thank her, Clara simply said, "If a chair can make someone pause and see a person, not through title or appearance, but through the dignity they carry in silence, then maybe we should make more chairs." The following month, Illyra was invited to serve as honorary director of a public service training program in the state of Illinois. She declined the title, but agreed to record a video teaching a breathing technique, the same one she had used to stay calm during that fateful flight. The video was played during the launch ceremony of the first class at the Quiet Leadership Institute, a place where people in service professions are trained to be heard without ever needing to raise their voices. At the end of each training cycle, every trainee was asked to write a personal commitment on a small card and place it on an empty chair at the center of the room. None of them knew. That chair was the original replica of the final seat, the first one Illyra had once defended until she was dragged away. Now it had become a symbol, not of outrage, but of quiet resolve. And by the end of that year, Clara withdrew from all leadership roles, leaving the dojo in the hands of the next generation. In her handwritten resignation letter, she wrote, "I used to think I had to speak loudly to be heard, but Illyra taught me sometimes the most right thing we can do is create a silence big enough for someone else to step into, without feeling small." Have you ever seen someone asked to leave their seat just because they didn't look the part? Have you ever stayed silent in the face of injustice, telling yourself, "It's not my business"? Or have you ever wished someone had stood up instead of turning away? If a single chair, plain, nameless, without a spotlight, can make people pause and think differently, then maybe we're all capable of doing more. So that silence is no longer avoidance, but a choice with dignity, with value, with impact. If this story made you feel outraged by injustice, moved by quiet strength, or simply inspired to treat strangers a little more kindly tomorrow, then share that feeling by leaving a comment below. Tap like if you believe justice doesn't have to be loud, and subscribe for more stories that might just change the way you see the world. Because sometimes all we need is someone who didn't walk away, a chair that wasn't taken, and a moment that refuses to be forgotten.